The global music world hit its lowest note when, at age 75, André Rieu, the beloved king of the waltz, collapsed mid-performance. A man who had spent his life bringing joy to millions through music suddenly faltered under the weight of his own body. The image shocked audiences everywhere. How could someone so full of life, who turned concert halls into ballrooms, suddenly stumble at the peak of his brilliance? To understand that moment, we have to step back and retrace the long, winding journey of the man behind the waltz. André Léon Marie Nicolas Rieu was born on October 1, 1949, in Maastricht, Netherlands. The time and family he was born into valued discipline above tenderness, order above affection. He was the third of 6 children in a house where his father's baton ruled mercilessly, both on the stage and at home. His father, also named André, was a renowned conductor, admired and respected by orchestras, but within the 4 walls of his home, his presence inspired more fear than love. There were no lullabies in their household, no spontaneous laughter echoing down the halls. Warmth was rare, and affection almost non-existent. "My parents didn't love me," André would later admit in interviews, not as an angry confession but as a quiet, factual statement. His mother was obsessed with grades, performance, and skills. Creativity was not nurtured, it was dismissed as a weakness. When teachers praised young André for his artistry, those words echoed back at him at home not as compliments but as accusations. But fate intervened when André turned 5. A slender, graceful teenager, just 18 years old, became his first violin teacher. She didn't scold him for mistakes or demand lifeless precision. Instead, she encouraged him to feel the music, to let emotion guide his bow. For the first time, the boy felt a tremor inside his heart that resembled freedom. Not love, not romance, but a spark of life that he had never known. In that bow's sweep, he found a doorway to something far bigger than himself. Other children practiced scales like drills. André chased resonance. Music became not just an activity, but a refuge. Yet that joy came at a cost. His growing fascination with waltzes collided head-on with his father's rigid sense of serious music. When young André played those lyrical, sweeping tunes, his father exploded, "I didn't raise you to play waltzes." Those words were more than criticism of style. They were designed to kill a dream. The final fracture with his family came in 1968, when André fell in love with Marjorie. She was not just a partner but someone who believed in his spirit. To his mother, however, Marjorie was unacceptable. "Leave," she ordered coldly. Rejection piled on rejection. That very night, André walked out of his childhood home and never returned. His parents never attended his concerts, not once in his entire career. Even as arenas filled with fans who adored him, the silence of home lingered like a shadow he could not shake. Later, he admitted that he spent years in therapy trying to understand why his childhood felt so hollow. Applause never filled that void. Yet through music, he found recognition, not just as a performer, but as a person finally seen. By 1978, after years of formal orchestral work that felt sterile and constrictive, André decided to break free. He assembled a small ensemble of 12 musicians, a group of dreamers who wore no costumes and carried no grand ambitions beyond sharing music. They played in community halls, weddings, even forgotten border towns. It wasn't about critics or prestige. It was about people. Marjorie was always at the center, though never in the spotlight. She became the unseen backbone of their enterprise. Handling business negotiations, writing arrangements, and making strategic decisions. When André hesitated at the idea of buying a crumbling castle, she famously quipped, "Sell more records." It was not sarcasm, it was vision. Her precision allowed his passion to soar. This quiet revolution turned into something much larger in 1987, when André officially founded the Johann Strauss Orchestra. Just 12 musicians, but with a radical mission, to restore joy to classical music. They rejected the solemn black tailcoats and instead wore vibrant colors. Their concerts invited audiences to feel alive. Their New Year's Day performance in 1988 was electric. Critics laughed, dismissing them as unserious. But audiences surged. They weren't just watching a concert, they were reclaiming music as something joyful and human. By 1995, André's orchestra achieved a breakthrough that cemented their place in history. At the UEFA Champions League final in Vienna, André and his musicians strode onto the pitch as Strauss's Waltz soared. Tens of thousands of football fans paused, swayed, and clapped. When Ajax scored a goal, the timing felt cosmic, as though sport and music had fused into one moment. That performance turned into legend. Overnight, Rieu's music topped the charts, staying at number 1 in the Netherlands for 19 weeks, a feat unheard of for classical music. Millions of albums sold worldwide. In Australia, his concerts drew stadium crowds of 38,000. His DVDs dominated the charts, standing alongside pop and rock icons like Pink and AC/DC. Classical music had rarely been this commercially explosive, and it was André who had made it happen. But not everyone was impressed. Traditionalists sneered. One conductor spat that André's shows were musical pornography, mocking the lights, the gowns, the laughter. To critics, joy had no place in art. But to André's audiences, joy was everything. Families danced, grandparents wept, children clapped in delight. With us, you don't feel the solemn hush that drives people away, André explained. He wasn't just selling concerts. He was giving away hope. Yet behind the glittering lights, the maestro was struggling. In 2010, at the very height of his career, disaster struck. A viral infection attacked his inner ear, specifically the vestibular nerve, the organ of balance. For a violinist, balance is everything. Suddenly, André's world tilted. The room spun mercilessly. He lay bedridden, dizzy, scanning walls that would not stay still. Tours were cancelled. Concerts called off. The man who had always said yes to music now had to say, I can't. Months passed. Conventional therapies failed. His recovery was painfully slow, until a letter from an Australian fan arrived. The fan described his own struggle with the same illness and suggested specific vestibular exercises. Desperate, André tried them. Gradually, the spinning subsided. With time, he stood again, first shaky, then steady. His comeback tour was not just about music, it was about proving he could rise after being felled. Yet the episode left scars. His equilibrium remained vulnerable, his body never quite the same. Doctors warned that another attack could be catastrophic, especially if it struck while he was on stage. In 2016, grief struck him harder than illness. His longtime friend and trombonist, Ruud Merckx, died suddenly during a tour. André was devastated. He was like a brother, he admitted later. In mourning, he cancelled shows in Nottingham, London, Birmingham, and Glasgow. For the orchestra, more than colleagues, truly a family, it was an earthquake. When the music eventually returned, it carried a weight of loss that never fully lifted. By 2019, another illness tried to silence him. A vicious flu drenched him in sweat and fever. Yet he performed, smiling through the pain, fighting against his own body. Few in the audience noticed how much he was suffering. The show went on, but at a cost. Then came Mexico City in March 2024. 6 sold-out concerts, tens of thousands of tickets. It was meant to be a triumph. Instead, it became a nightmare. The altitude, jet lag, and flu collided like storm clouds. Backstage, André faltered, feverish, confused, struggling to breathe. He called Marjorie in a hushed voice, I don't want a first concert day like this ever again. 4 concerts collapsed into chaos. Over 40,000 ticket holders were furious. The 125-member orchestra was sent home mid-tour. Refunds, cancelled flights, and disappointment rippled through fans and crew alike. In that crisis, Pierre, André's son, stepped forward. Once just tour manager, Pierre became a shield. He slowed his father's punishing schedule, cutting intercontinental marathons. Tours were refocused on Europe, where recovery and safety were easier. Every flight, every venue now passed through a filter. Could André do this without breaking? Pierre became the weight-bearer, ensuring music continued without destroying the man at its center. From then on, every performance became a balancing act. Behind the curtain were medical checklists taped to the dressing room wall: hydrate before stage, limit encore length, no post-show handshakes until heart rate stabilized. The audience never saw them, but they were the silent script. Pierre enforced them with the same strictness his grandfather once demanded of tempo. André adjusted his artistry: fewer high-energy polkas, more ballads, more intimate storytelling. Fans embraced the changes, often without realizing they were part of a survival strategy. At home in Maastricht, André slowed his rehearsal rhythm. Instead of endless hours with the full orchestra, he practiced quietly in the garden of his 15th-century house, saving energy for the stage. Friends noticed a softer tone in his voice, fewer late-night calls, and a newfound willingness to say no. He was learning to survive, not just perform. And yet, for André, slowing down was its own kind of struggle. Touring had been his oxygen for decades. Without it, he sometimes felt suffocated. Still, when he stepped back on stage after each battle, the applause sounded different, not just celebratory but relieved. For months, no one knew if the King of the Waltz would play again. In Antwerp, after his 2010 illness, tickets had already sold out before his collapse. Many expected a reduced show. Instead, André delivered 3 full hours of music without cutting a single piece. The crowd erupted. But careful eyes saw the adjustments. He sat between numbers, paced himself, and for the first time, Pierre stood visibly side-stage, watching his father's every move. In later interviews, André admitted Pierre had strict instructions to intervene if dizziness returned. It was not just about music anymore. It was about survival. Pierre's role only grew. He wasn't just a tour manager anymore, he became a guardian. He scheduled longer rest periods, negotiated with venues for slower setups, and ensured medical staff were present at every performance. André sometimes resisted, wanting to push harder, but even he acknowledged that his son's caution was the reason he could continue at all. Fans, meanwhile, noticed subtle changes. Concerts became more intimate, with André speaking to audiences more often, sharing stories between pieces. It wasn't just energy management, it was connection. He wanted them to feel part of his journey, to know the highs, the fears, the triumphs. The music was still dazzling, but the vulnerability made it unforgettable. By 2019, his concerts in Maastricht broke attendance records. Thousands sang along under the summer sky. It could have been the perfect ending to a legendary career. But André wasn't done. Not yet. Even the pandemic in 2020, which halted global tours, didn't silence him. He rehearsed, recorded, and stayed connected with his musicians. When live music finally returned, audiences were louder, hungrier, more emotional than ever. André had missed them more than he admitted. Now, at 75, André Rieu is still playing, still carrying the weight of every triumph and every scar. Each note he draws is more than music, it is survival, defiance, and gratitude. But the collapse mid-performance reminded the world, and perhaps reminded André himself, that no one escapes time. Behind the joy, behind the glittering gowns and swirling waltzes, stands a man who has fought illness, grief, and exhaustion. And privately, he and Pierre have discussed something extraordinary, the possibility of one final world tour, the biggest they've ever attempted. No dates announced. No venues revealed. But if it happens, it won't just be another series of concerts. It will be a test of everything they've built, the music, the stamina, and above all, the bond between father and son. For the first time, the question is no longer, can André Rieu do it? The question is, should he? Because sometimes, the hardest waltz is not the one on stage, but the dance with time itself.